Welcome to No Compromises, a peek into the mind of two old web devs who have seen some things. This is Joel.
And this is Aaron.
It's another special episode of our series we've been doing on how we work on projects. And today we're going to take maybe a slight detour and talk about a special kind of project, which is the legacy project. So what I mean by this is a project we are not starting fresh. It is coming to us with history, maybe you could say with baggage, and maybe with or without any sort of documentation. And so I know you and I have a way that we kind of onboard a project like that and approach it. And I thought it might be useful to kind of talk that through today.
Sure. Yeah, I think it starts out a little boring, the whole process, but then it really starts to kick off and then you get comfortable with it. So I think, the first thing we always talk about is like planning, right? And as programmers, we're like, I just want to get in their code, look at the code or whatever. That's great. And that's going to be part of it. But the very first thing we kind of do is develop a plan of like, what do we all need to do even? And we're going to talk about those steps. So for this particular project, what are the steps that we need to do? And then to try to understand some of how the project even works.
Right.
So that can be a mix of like talking to the client and asking them to kind of do a demo for us, or, writing our own documentation as we go through, or a mix of that.
Yeah.
And so I guess the first thing is the demo. And so sometimes we're not the best at this, but we need to get better. And this is what I want to do, which is to make sure that we can see a whole demo of all the features and ask questions along the way. Yeah. In reality, a lot of times happens as we just get a demo or a recording of a demo of a couple of the happy paths. But that's better than nothing, right? So the first thing is to kind of understand how the project works.
Yeah. And just like related to that, like one reason that can be beneficial, of course, it gives you context and you kind of understand maybe what are the more important parts of the application. Those tend to be what they demo, but it can also help, like they're clicking through and there's like 4 menus, like, oh yeah, we don't use those. We don't even know what those are for. So like if you didn't do that demo and get that context, you might struggle. Like, why doesn't this entire menu work over here? Oh yeah, we haven't used that in 5 years. And so nobody ever took it out and it's broken, but like we could have wasted a lot of time trying to figure that out without getting that context.
Yeah. And I guess I probably said it in passing, but I'll say it again because it's really important. The biggest change, the biggest difference I've made is to record these demos when they're happening, because then later on I can go watch it again. You're at least for me, I was going to say you're going to forget, but at least I know I'll forget everything I just saw almost immediately after I've seen it.
No, I agree with that. Yep.
So I have I keep the collection of the videos of some demos, and then you can watch it again. In some of the larger ones, I'll admit to this, I've even kept like a note with it and kind of said at what minute time a certain feature was covered when I watched it this next time. So that way I can go back there and then, go forward and backwards. And I'll tell you why that really matters on a project I just did recently is their test setup was very poor. And so it was a combination of there's many steps to set up a test account.
Okay.
And sometimes that didn't work in their test environment. And I was rebuilding some of these interfaces. So there wasn't even a good chance I could go in there and relook at the interface again. So luckily I had this video, and a good portion of the stuff I did was based off kind of going frame by frame in some of the videos, seeing what's in the drop-down boxes for options and stuff like that. It wasn't perfect. I later on compared it to some of the code too, and did it, but it saved me a lot of time having those videos to be able to go through.
Yeah, absolutely. So, once you get that demo, I tend to also kind of look at docs, and maybe we've just had a really unfortunate series of projects, but it's pretty rare that in my experience to get a project handed off that has robust documentation. Like there might be a README file, and it might
or all. Yeah, I was going to say or all, any docs. Yeah,
the README is like the default Laravel install README. But generally speaking, it's pretty rare to get docs that tell you everything you wish you wanted to know. Like that's,
Mhm.
and I'll even admit, like for our projects, like it's really hard to capture every single piece of knowledge in documentation. But that'd be the
Mhm.
next place we go.
I think it makes sense. You mentioned like the README.
Mm-hmm.
The way I kind of look at documentation for projects too, I'm not going to go too far into this, but is the README with the code should be the technical steps to get that code running and or deployed.
Yes. Yeah.
And then a wiki in like GitHub or Confluence or something like that would be the area that you put your business stuff.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
like your domain requirements, understanding how the business works and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If you start to put that in the code base, it's programmers, you have to kind of discipline yourself to write that. So it kind of needs to be a separate process. And also if you're putting too much technical stuff inside of like the Confluence or wiki, it tells me that that you don't have stuff automated properly.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned like how to get the code running, and that's kind of where my mind goes next is
Mhm.
actually getting my local dev environment operational. Like, can I run this code locally? Because that's, to me, that's a critical, like you can't do development if you can't run it local. Some people we've worked with maybe had other methodologies like a shared online environment or something like that. But for us, that's sort of a deal breaker. Like we have to
Mhm.
run it locally. And while we try to get that running, kind of going back to the docs, that's where we put those steps, because then
Mhm.
the next person should be able to check out the repo, look at the README, and get it running. I'd like to say in less than an hour, if not less than 30 minutes, right? That's the goal,
Yeah,
I think.
and 95% of the time it'll work.
Yeah, sure.
like versus zero and we got it or whatever. You can't promise
Mhm.
it's gonna be perfect, but
Yeah.
then it'll be down to like in half an hour you got it running, and there's maybe zero problems or one problem.
Mhm.
Not like how do I get this to work again?
Right, exactly.
So then the next challenge we kind of have is unit test, integration, feature tests, all those different things. And
Mhm.
depending on the project, how it's written, maybe there is a test kit, test suite available. A lot of the projects that I've taken over and we've taken over that were very legacy didn't have anything involved whatsoever.
Yeah.
And so then we go and use specific tools to go and write more end-to-end tests. So you have it running locally, and maybe you don't necessarily do anything but reseed the database to a specific thing when the tests
Mhm.
start. Because ideally in unit tests, it should be like always predictable and always
Yeah.
have fixtures or whatnot. But when you get like a legacy project, a lot of times what we'll do is we'll have like some more of these end-to-end tests on the outside of the application, whatever language it happens to be, and exercising those in the browser on our local version to kind of make sure we understand how things go. And
Yeah.
the reason that's important is two things. One, it also again continues to help us understand how the application works. So you have to understand how the application works in order to write the test. I mean, you have to know where to click and what you should expect
Yeah.
if you want to write tests that click and expect things, right?
Right.
And then the second is it's one of those protection sort of things to make sure we don't introduce any regression as we're refactoring some of the code.
Yeah, that's a good point, because we're obviously not going to inherit a project. And step one is do absolutely nothing until we've established 100% test coverage. Like
Mhm.
that's just not practical. But yeah, some basic kind of smoke tests, like can you log in? Can you do
Yeah.
these important things? And then when we're getting to an area, we are going to make some modifications, writing some tests around that sort of as you go.
Yeah. I mean, a kind of rule I like to say is, like you said, log in, and then whatever is the main features or the revenue generators for that company, for that application, we want to do those things that we don't maybe need to necessarily write tests on right away. Things like reports, right?
Sure.
I
Yeah.
mean, they're great. I mean, they're necessary, but write them when we get to them or whatever.
Just the roller coaster of emotions I feel when you first check out that repo, and you're like, okay, there's a tests folder. Ooh, there's like a feature and a unit folder, and then you expand it, and there's one file in each called example test. You're like, no, we were so close. I thought we had something.
Don't get me started on a rant of when you see a super popular package too, and that's the first thing I do is I go look at the test folder and there's no tests, and I'm like, how is a million people installing this without worrying?
I've had that same thought. All right, so maybe just one last topic to touch on. And I'll kind of put, or like a hybrid topic here is version control. Like I'm assuming, and really we've had pretty good success with the projects we inherit, at least have version control. So that's kind of like most of them. Yeah. I mean, and if not, obviously that's step one. It's like we have to have that. But like a CI pipeline or some sort of automation of a build or running tests or something, we like to have that, and we would certainly set that up in a new project. But I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about how we approach that with a legacy project as well.
Yeah. So when you say like a CI pipeline, kind of like what are you all including in there, and like why does that matter?
Okay, so like for me, the most important thing is some sort of reproducible, automatic thing that verifies the project is not completely broken. And so, like, kind of the easy thing you put in there is a linter. Like that's trivial to set up. But then the next thing would be running tests. And so obviously that has less value if there are no tests. But we're going to write some of those tests we talked about. But just getting that in place so that as we push code, as we open a pull request, things like that, at the very minimum, it's running those sorts of basic things automatically.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. To me, where I've always struggled, and I think we've had conversations about this too, is the CI/CD. So the deployment part of that.
Yes,
is it important? Is it important to have the deployment automated at the same time? I think that there are reasons why and reasons why not. I would say the biggest reason is not so much automated on a deploy, but reproducible.
Yeah.
So I want my deployment reproducible and hopefully automated.
Well, and like that is usually one of the biggest question marks when you inherit a project is like, well, how do I get new code up there? Because people have all sorts of bizarre ways of doing this. I'm thinking of one in particular where, there was a Git repo on their production environment, but there's all sorts of like hidden little things you had to do after you pulled in the latest code, reset permissions or run this other file or restart this service. And so for this one in particular, we haven't yet automated the deploy, but it's in the README, like the exact steps that I run every single time. And now that you have that and you kind of get some comfort, been doing that for a few weeks or even a couple months, then we can revisit like, okay, is now the time to automate that because we're really confident we've kind of figured out all the weird edge cases about deploying.
Yeah. So I think that makes sense. So when we get these new projects, we want to make sure we understand how the project works, generate some documentation or make sure the documentation is up to date. Sometimes there's documentation and it's like, well, that was how it functioned 2 years ago.
Right.
Well, that's not helpful either. And then move through understanding, having some, how it works, running it locally, running unit tests, and then some sort of automated, CI tool and possibly, automated deploy or whatever. And that's kind of how you take a project, at least how we take a project, over. It's really exciting to get a new project and just want to like run and do some new changes or, also, I guess, having that conversation with the client when they think that when you take it over, you should just be able to do the exact same thing as their last team was doing.
Yeah. Day one, taking over the project, we're not going to fix that bug that's been in your backlog for 3 weeks. That's for sure. But just to your point, having that conversation. In fact, sometimes we've established an initial kickoff phase of the project that's really just dedicated exclusively to onboarding the project, and we'll kind of time box it. We'll set a scope, we'll set a flat fee, but that even further communicates to the client, like, all right, we're just getting our feet wet here. When this phase is done, then we're going to get into development. It doesn't mean we won't continue to onboard and improve the project, but at least that phase is over. And now the active development phase has a discrete start to it.
So are you more of a tea person or a coffee person, Joel?
Aaron, I'm drinking coffee right now. I like tea, but I would definitely, if I had to pick a camp, coffee person.
You said it like I should just know that you're drinking coffee. Yeah, you have a mug, but I don't know what's in there.
I was going to say we're on a video call.
No, I want to be a tea person, and I keep like collecting tea devices, like different ways to make tea. But maybe someone can let us know if there's an easier way to like clean out these devices too, because I have like this little ball that you put like tea leaves in.
Yep, loose
and then
tea,
when you make your tea, and then you have like this compacted little ball of gunk.
Mm-hmm.
And like, to me, it's already been like half ruining my experience. I'm like, oh, delicious tea, and then I'm like, I got to clean out this garbage puck. Do people even use bookmarks anymore, or do they just type masteringLaravel.io right into the browser?
I know the site is important to you, Aaron, because it's something we've been working on. But for others, please visit masteringLaravel.io to see what we've been building.